Another 5 million people have filed for jobless claims as the coronavirus continues to grip the U.S. economy. That means an estimated 22 million people have submitted jobless claims in the last 4 weeks. That's accounting for roughly 13% of the U.S. workforce. Frances Stacy joins us now with more. She is the Director of Portfolio Strategy at Optimal Capital. Frances, thanks for waiting around for us. We appreciate it. So these unemployment numbers are shocking, and I think for a lot of Americans waking up and seeing these numbers and then seeing the totality of the number of their fellow Americans who are filing for unemployment is going to be pretty tough to swallow. Will we continue to see unemployment numbers rising like this over the next couple of weeks?
I don't know if over the next couple of weeks things will kind of flatten. I think the first wave of people who are getting laid off has probably peaked. But I think that in the coming months and through the end of the year, when businesses reopen and they realize that the capacity is not anywhere near back to where it was pre-virus, I think we're going to see another secondary wave of massive layoffs. The other thing that may keep the numbers growing a bit is just that I have anecdotal stories of people who call in on the line and they're trying to connect with their unemployment claim. And because of the overload, they haven't been able to get through yet. So we could see still an uptick in numbers, but I think this will remain steady for a weekly basis for a little while. Stock markets tend to bottom out before these these unemployment claims peak. So that's going to be interesting to watch as well.
So you talked about the possibility of a second wave, and that was going to be my follow-up question. Some of these people applying for unemployment benefits are going to be furloughed workers, and the expectation is that there's a job for them to return to afterwards. Do we have a sense of how many people will be able to return to work so we can get a real sense of the long-term impact of this virus on the economy?
I don't think we have any sense because I don't know which businesses are going to be impacted from a psychological perspective, and I don't think anyone knows. There's starting to be rumors, and I have a great client in Silicon Valley, and there are a lot of models being built now to try and anticipate psychologically how are people and consumers going to change. Are they going to be in packed restaurants anymore? How long is it going to take for them to feel safe to go back to sporting events, et cetera? And I don't think there's any real way of anticipating that. So that's the thing that remains to be seen. And I don't know, I've talked to friends and they said, yeah, we're living on 3 outfits and we're living on this. And so people are just learning to live with a lot less. And I wonder how much that's going to stick. And it just remains to be seen.
The question I sort of have, Frances, and I know it's hard to sort of quantify this, but if the President of the United States encourages governors to reopen their economies, and there are some governors who are indeed considering that, the question becomes one of confidence. How confident will Americans be to go back to the workplace? Those who can afford to continue staying at home and drawing a paycheck and working from home, I guess, is really that answer. But how confident will you be if you got medical professionals on one side saying, look, if this virus is not contained, getting back to work could be problematic. You may indeed spread the virus further and we may see more deaths, versus the need for people to see an economy that is robust and see these jobs coming back. Asking Americans to balance those two seems to be pretty unfair. So how confident would we be that Americans would follow those guidelines to go back to work?
Yeah, I think that it depends, I think, like you said, how desperate people are to get back to work or if they have alternatives. If they have alternatives, I think that they will continue to work from home for a while because they can. I think the people who desperately need to get back to work, I think, are perhaps even more vulnerable to the virus. And so it's such a hard question to answer. But I think psychologically going forward, for the airlines, right? My employer spent tons of money every year flying me all over the place. Is he going to request now that I do Zoom meetings, not even because of the virus scare, but just because it's so much more cost effective? I think those things are the things that we can't anticipate, and society will change. And most offices weren't going to go virtual, but now that they have gone virtual, I think the business model is going to change pretty dramatically. As far as confidence, I think that we're actually going to see this kind of come apart along political lines. I mean, you just hear so many different news stories that are politically biased, and how people feel about how dangerous the virus is versus the economy seems, I think it will become a political issue, particularly because it's an election year. So that's going to be interesting to see how that turns out.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen protests in Michigan, here in Pennsylvania, where I am. The legislature voted to lift the stay-at-home order that the governor put in place. He's probably going to veto that piece of legislation, but there's definitely, we're starting to see a little bit of a backlash to these stay-at-home orders. But you got to wonder, there's also been, and what's probably part sort of feeding into that is the fact that there have been several hiccups when it comes to the government's plan to financially support people through this hard time. We just ran a story about people not getting stimulus checks that they thought they were going to be getting. We've talked about how difficult it is for small businesses to get the loans that were promised to them so that they would keep their workforce employed. I'm wondering, it's so crucial that people are able to at least stay afloat during this time. Why do you think there have been so many problems?
Well, I don't think it's anything that anybody prepared for. So, when you're talking about sending a check, to so many citizens and people are in a hurry, it is interesting. The small business loans, they're saying it's been reported that they've run out of money. And I have a statistic that 55% of small businesses cannot survive more than a 3-month shutdown. And unfortunately, these crises happen to do that. I mean, in the 70s, you had, the gas crisis where there was a supply shortage. And unfortunately, that gas crisis, when people were waiting hours for gas, wiped out most of the small oil companies, and the big oil companies took over. In the global financial crisis, you had a lot of big banks, a lot of the smaller banks got completely wiped out, and then there was more concentration into the big banks. And I do predict that we are going to see that in society, where many small businesses get wiped out, and there will be a higher concentration in larger companies that were able to survive this. And that's unfortunate, but it does go along with pandemics.
Frances, before we let you go, you said something that was really, really interesting that I just sort of want to drill down a little bit more on. This idea that things will change in the United States much the same as they changed in the wake of 9/11, right? And here you talked about the idea that a lot of companies may look at how effective people have been. And that ranges from the news business to perhaps your business and others in working from home and still being able to do their jobs. Not ideal in some cases, but probably what a lot of companies are seeing is that they're saving some money in having a certain number of employees working from home and doing their jobs from home. Will that affect, how will that affect the overall economy? How will that affect companies putting together strategies for the future? In other words, if a company can prove that they can save money by having more employees working from home, and that looks good to the stock price of that individual company, to the stock market, do you think companies will be doing that? Or will they say, you know what, it's still better to have you, Frances, in front of a client sitting at a conference room table as opposed to zooming in to talk to that particular client or that particular investor?
Yeah, I think it's going to happen more than we suspect, because it's exactly for the reasons that you stated, which profit margins are something that companies have to grow in order to substantiate their earnings per share multiples, which substantiates their stock price. And the profit margin, when you can't up revenue, your only other alternative is to cut costs. And so I think as the reacceleration can be very slow, I think cutting costs is still going to be very primary. As far as me, I actually have worked remotely in this job. My firm is in Michigan and I live on the West Coast, and I'm coming to you from Florida. So I've worked remotely in my job for a couple of years, not knowing that this would become sort of the status quo. And it's kind of funny because I have clients all over the US whom I regularly talk to at a distance. Now, my clients are very used to that. I don't think that it's going to completely replace the in-person experience, but companies, I think, will be very conservative to increase costs. So this may last longer than we think.
All right, Frances, Stacy, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.